Hi, Dana.
I have got 7 o'clock on my watch, my phone, and my computer, which means it's the trifecta of right times for us to start the workshop. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to make sure we're recording. Great. Hey, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I know that we've got 1,000 different things that we can be doing, but you've chosen to spend that time with us, listening to our panel and doing some questions and answers, and we really value that. So my name's Derek. I am lucky enough to be involved in Parents Helping Parents on a couple of different fronts, and I'm also lucky enough to get to host you guys in the session today. So if you're not familiar with Parents Helping Parents, we're a Oklahoma-based nonprofit organization that's founded by parents, for the most part run by parents. For the most part, it's run by parent volunteers, whose aimed and goal is to provide parent support, education, and shared experiences with parents who have walked the path of having a loved one that struggled with addiction. So Parents Helping Parents hosts numerous support groups, all virtually right now, obviously because of the pandemic. If you want more information about that stuff, you can visit their website at parentshelpingparents.info. You can also visit their Facebook page at Parents Helping Parents Inc. And follow them there for all the updates and all the wonderful things they do. So what I am going to do is I'm going to introduce Hugh, who is a board member for Parents Helping Parents Inc. and is also going to be moderating our panel discussion tonight. So let me get Hugh's video pinned on my recording, and then I'm going to pass it to him to take over, and I'm going to kind of make sure that we're all just doing the right things in the background. Hugh, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Derek. And thanks everybody for being here. And thanks, Derek, for sort of providing the technical expertise we need. So thanks for that. I'm really going to do very little. I want to introduce, we have 3 panelists, and one of those panelists is struggling with the link right now. So we're hoping he'll be on in a few minutes. Our other 2 panelists are Dana. If you look at her screen, it says Dana K. And then Virginia Holloman is our other panelist. And Bill Guy, when he gets here, Bill will be our 3rd panelist. And I'm just going to ask them a few questions. It turns out, when I was thinking about this morning, it turns out that all 3 of them have sons who struggle with substance use disorder. That's not usual in Parents Helping Parents. It's sometimes sons and sometimes daughters. Just in this case, they're all sons. It's all different in each case. And so I'm going to ask them. Our topic is sort of how to deal with substance use disorder over the holidays. And so I'm going to ask each of them to just very quickly, as I introduce them, tell a little story or a little bit of some anxieties or fears or worries they've had in the past about the holidays and with substance use in their family. So I'm going to start with Dana. Dana, could you tell us how that's gone for you?
Well, 2018 was not very good. And then 2019, in the past, my son had been living out of state for the past 7 years. When he would come home for the holidays, he would be home with us. And then last year was the first year he was not living at home. And he was supposed to come to a family Christmas Eve dinner. And of course, it's time to eat and he doesn't show up. So, I start letting my mind race and get all worked up or trying to call him and he's not answering. So then I can't enjoy myself because I'm worried about him. Come to find out, again, sometimes I'm my own worst enemy. And while it was irresponsible, he had just fallen asleep. He showed up, he was fine. So I caused all that panic myself by the different scenarios I'd let run through my head when really everything was fine.
Good. Well, thanks. I certainly have had that experience myself. I also meant to let people know, the audience, if you'd like to ask questions, or you have a comment or a similar experience, you can certainly add them in chat. Or if you just, if you want to ask a question live, go ahead and feel free to do that. So Virginia, how about you? How have your holidays been? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I've had a few holidays where I've had a lot of anxieties and fears and worries. And, generally speaking, most of those anxieties, fears, and worries have resulted from expectations I had about the holidays and what I thought the holidays should look like. I have all these warm and fuzzy memories of past holidays, both as a child and as an adult when my kids were young. And I just have always worried about trying to replicate those holidays of the past. So, a couple of instances come to mind. One year, my son, who was 17 at the time, was in residential treatment during Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that was certainly not what I thought the holidays should look like. I worried that I was ruining everyone's holiday. I feared my son would never forgive me for keeping him in treatment during such sacred and treasured times. He begged me to let him come home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I wouldn't let him. I also worried that I was ruining the holidays for the rest of the family. My husband and me and I, we actually got to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas with my son at the treatment facility, but I worried about leaving my daughter behind, as well as my parents and extended family, because the treatment facility was in Texas, and of course everybody was back in Oklahoma. I had a ton of fears just about my son being in treatment in and of itself, but having him in treatment during the holidays just compounded all of my worries and fears. And so, later when my son was sober, I worried about my son at our holiday family get-togethers when everyone was drinking, as the culture in my family is to drink cocktails at get-togethers. And I did not want to ask my family members to refrain from drinking just because my son has issues with substance use. So, I worried about whether, all the drinking would entice my son to drink and how it would make him feel, etc. So those are just a couple of instances about, some of my anxieties, worries, and fears that I've experienced during the holidays. There's been others, but those are just a few of them.
Greg, can I ask a quick question? You said that you didn't feel comfortable interfering, or I forget how you put it, about telling your other members not to drink at family gatherings. Can you explain why you didn't feel comfortable doing that?
I can. Hugh, Bill Guy, who is our other panelist, is asking me a question, trying to get in. I don't want to break up this, but I want him to get in if we can.
He's on.
Bill's on.
Wonderful. Okay, sorry. Okay, so your question was, I'm sorry, Hugh, can you ask the question again?
I was just, when you said that you were uncomfortable telling your family not to drink because of your son, what made you uncomfortable about that?
Well, I don't know that it was I was uncomfortable, and if I said that, I just didn't want to go trying to control things. I mean, I didn't want to try to control everybody to make my son. I mean, I knew that, my son was going to have to learn how to handle the world, and whether it was my family or, other instances, my son was going to have to learn how to handle himself. And if I was going to go trying to control environments for my son, I was going to be in a world of trouble. And I didn't need to go trying to control environments everywhere. So I need to keep it to myself, and my son needed to work on himself. And whatever happened in environments happened. And so believe me, that was my first thought, was trying to go ask everybody, would you please not drink? But once I started working on myself and realizing that I don't have control of everybody, and I don't need to go controlling my son, I realized that's probably not the best thing to do.
Good. Thank you. And as I mentioned, our third board member, our panel member, was having a problem getting on. We didn't have the links quite right, so, but I see that Bill is here. And Bill, you have heard most of what's happened other than introductions. So I wonder if you might say a little bit about any anxieties, fears, and worries you've had over the holidays in the past. Don't forget you're on mute.
You know, I don't think anybody who has a loved one who is involved in substances, you know, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that doesn't have anxiety, you know, not just at Christmas, but, you know, any, you know, Thanksgiving falls, any holiday where the family is used to getting together and where everyone is expecting a good time. You know, I can't imagine not having anxiety around that. And I certainly did.
Right.
I mean, you don't know, you know, it goes back to, you know, having unreasonable expectations. You know, you don't know whether, you know, it was our son, and he, by the time I found out that he had a real problem, he had graduated from high school and was sometimes on his own. And, you know, I don't know whether I had greater anxiety about whether he wouldn't show up or whether he would show up, you know, because if he showed up, you never knew. He wasn't one really to come in. Well, he certainly did in, you know, not in a, you know, family situation where there were a lot of people there. He did come into our home high, but he always managed to, you know, at least until he got so bad that, you know, he wasn't coming. When the family would get together, he would manage to, you know, to have it together. But, you know, then the rest of the family members who aren't living it, you know, 24 hours a day, you know, they don't know what to say or not say. And it just, you know, you're just all walking on eggshells, or that's the way it was in our home.
Good. Yeah, thanks. I know what I know what it feels like to walk on eggshells for sure. So in light of that anxiety, I thought I'd ask each of us to talk about what they did in order to deal with the anxieties and fears that come up over the holidays, and if some of the things they did was helpful, and if some of the things they did, some of them were not helpful. Mostly, what were the helpful things you did over the holidays to reduce that anxiety and fear? So Dana, what were some of the things that you have found helpful? I think you said 2018 was not a good year, so that suggests that maybe 2019 wasn't quite so bad. So what did you do in 2019?
Well, again, I've just had to work on myself and just learning how to handle situations. We did have a speaker at one of our Parents Helping Parents meetings that talked to us about, you know, you need to just stop and assess the situation and say, hey, do I know that this is a fact? You know, do I know that this is really happening? Or, you know, is just my brain run away with itself? And most of the time that's what it is. I do that quite frequently. If I can't get a hold of him, I start thinking of all these things, and it's just that he was busy, or he couldn't get to the phone. Um, there's just so many things that I do to myself, and I have to learn how to not do that.
Yeah. Are there any examples you can think of that I mean, you had that really nice example that you just sort of it turned out that he was just late and there was no big deal. But when we're dealing with this, we're all afraid of the phone call and any other examples of that sort of thing that helped?
It just helps me to, honestly, I do say the serenity prayer a lot. uh, and again, I do just have to stop myself and say, hey, do I know that this is a fact? I need to not let my mind run off until I know something for sure.
Right. Good. Well, thanks. A therapist that was working with my son at one point described that when I let my mind do that, she called it that the city committee. I cleaned that up. That's not what she called it, but that SH committee going on in my head, and I just sort of needed to have a tool, like Dana said, the city prayer, whatever it was, have a tool to well, in my case, to shut that committee up, right? Just to shut it up. So, because once it gets going in my head, it gets pretty wild. So Virginia, how about you? What were some of the things that you found helpful in dealing with the anxiety?
Well, one of the biggest things I did was to change my expectations of the holidays and to let a lot of those expectations go. As I mentioned earlier, most of my anxieties, fears, and worries resulted from expectations I had about the holidays. I think about the movie National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. I think many of y'all may be familiar with that movie, and Clark Griswold. And Clark Griswold always wanted everything to be perfect and have that Hallmark perfect Christmas. And there's a scene in the movie where Clark Griswold's wife, Ellen, says to Clark, she says, "You set standards that no family can live up to." And Clark says, "When have I ever done that?" And Ellen says, "Birthdays, weddings, anniversaries, funerals, vacations, graduations, and so on." And I think many of us are like that. We all want to have those perfect Hallmark holidays where our families are all gathered around the table and everything is just perfect. But I think, like the Griswolds, rarely is that the case, especially if you have children who struggle with substance use. So, family life is built on expectations for one another's behaviors. And at its best, this shared understanding of how we expect our children or loved ones to act keeps life running smoothly. But high expectations can be resentments waiting to happen. You might have heard the phrase, expectations are premeditated resentments. And one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, says that disappointment is unmet expectations. And the more significant the expectation, the more significant the disappointment. And that is just so true. So I changed my expectations and let go of many of my expectations. And I accepted that my expectations of that perfect Hallmark holiday was not going to be met. And in doing so, this significantly reduced my stress level. letting go of expectations ended a cycle of anticipation and disappointment. And this was true of the expectations I had for my son who struggled with substance use, as well as for all of my loved ones. And especially in talking, in discussing this with, or addressing this with my son who struggled with substance use, sometimes you have to accept limitations within people. Our children are not bad, but they may have some limitations in how to handle certain things. So this is really a situation where you have to have so much empathy, compassion, and patience. So when you let your expectations go, you can let go of a lot of anger and sadness. And if you bring your expectations in line with another person's reality, it's possible to reconcile many conflicts. So I adopted the phrase, keep your expectations at your ankles. With regard to that, Thanksgiving and Christmas, when my son was in treatment, I don't regret that for one moment. I don't regret, keeping him in there during that time. Yes, things were different, but I changed my expectations. I accepted that things didn't always have to be how they had always been to celebrate. My husband and I were able to celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas with my son there at the treatment facility, and they ended up being incredibly wonderful celebrations with our newly sober son, and that was just fantastic. And then we celebrated again with our family members when we returned home. And I was very grateful for all of that. It was different, but it was wonderful at the same time. And I'm very thankful for a very wise person who told me before my son went to treatment to not let the holidays be an obstacle to getting my son to treatment. And so if there's anyone here who is thinking about helping navigate their loved one to treatment right now, I would caution you to not wait until after the holidays to do it. Do it now. In my situation, waiting could have been too late. Turning to my fears about holiday gatherings and drinking around my son, I let go of the expectations around what I expected in that regard and determined the least I could accept. I talked to my son about it, and I told my son that if he did not feel comfortable with everyone around him drinking, that he could simply leave. I would not expect him to stick around and be uncomfortable. Would that mean letting go of my expectations that all family members would celebrate together? Yes, but that was okay. I let go of that. But what I would not allow is for him to drink at the gathering since he was underage. So I told him that, I just wasn't going to participate in that. I was not going to participate in breaking the law by contributing to him drinking. So I told him that if he did feel that he needed to drink and felt that being around him, he wanted to drink, I wasn't going to get in the way of that, but that he needed to go somewhere else. So that's kind of how we handled that. So those are just a few examples of how I let go of some of my expectations for the holidays. And I've held fast to letting go of expectations in pretty much all of my affairs with my children and all of my loved ones. I became aware of the power of expectations and explored which ones I was willing to change to help me see a path forward. Although we can't change our children or loved ones, we can change what we expect and demand of them, making room for new possibilities for our relationship with them. And if we keep our expectations low or keep our expectations at our ankles, then if our loved ones exceed these expectations, how wonderful that is. One of my favorite quotes is from Alexander Pope, an English poet, who said, "Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed." And finally, especially around the holidays and really all year long, I practice gratitude, and that has been extremely helpful. I challenge my negative thoughts and choose to look for what is good, even when it feels difficult, and especially when it feels difficult. I practice gratitude daily. Every day, I write 5 things down in a journal that I'm grateful for. But on top of that, when I have negative thoughts, or especially during the holidays when things just aren't going my way, I look at what I have instead of what I don't have, and I write those things down. The more we practice gratitude, the more our neurons activate around positive experiences, and the habits of the brain begin to rewire. So those are some ways that I've coped with handling the holidays, and really how I've handled everyday life as well. So
Thanks, Virginia. I really liked what you said at the end there about gratitude. I think I never would have wanted to have to go through this, but the one thing it clearly has done for me is made me appreciate the things I have. Shame on me for not having appreciated them before, but it takes what it takes. It just is if I get to sit down, I did get to sit down with my loved one for Thanksgiving dinner. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have appreciated that. I appreciated that. I knew that was special. So thanks a lot, Virginia, for what you said there. And Bill, what have you found helpful in dealing with the anxiety surrounding the holidays?
Well, certainly it applies to the holidays, but I would have to say that I was able to become regular in some practices that really helped my anxiety level all the time. And as I said earlier, we didn't find out, or I didn't find out until he lived with his mom and stepdad, and there's no blame to them, but I then found later, when he did live with us, that it's hard enough, just because the kid is living in the house with you doesn't mean that what's going on and what isn't going on. But he, after he graduated from high school, he was independent some of the time. He lived with his mom and stepdad some of the time. He came and lived with Rita and I some of the time. He lived with his brother, some of the time. So I wasn't in a situation where where he was there, but of course I knew what was going on, and it's kind of goes back to what Dana said before. When you're not there, and you don't really have an opportunity to see them, and you're halfway across the country, your mind just runs wild, and so I became so anxious. I didn't realize the degree to which it was affecting me. There's kind of an urban legend that if you take a pot of tepid water and you put a frog in it, and I guess you'd have to put a lid on it or the frog would hop out anyway. But the legend has it that if you turn the flame on low, that the frog, being a reptile, its body temperature will adjust to its surroundings, and it will eventually boil to death because it just adjusts to what's happening. And I think that for way too long, that's what I did. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to cure it. I didn't know, and so I just dealt with it, as best we could. There was all kinds of things. There were accidents, there were hospital visits, there were jail visits, and you just, I just kind of, as the tension and the anxiety increased, my efforts to try to do something about it increased. And ultimately I had a what was a major depressive spell. I don't know what else to call it. And my wife recognized, that something was wrong, and so I got some counseling and it helped, But then we moved back to Oklahoma in 2014, and Chris by that time was about 30 years old, and his use was significant enough that there were times when he could, and in fact he told me one time, he said, Dad, I didn't have to use it during the week. There was a period of time where I didn't have to use it during the week, but then I partied all weekend, so he was kind of functioning, but while I said, being halfway across the country, made you more anxious, I don't know which is worse, to be there and hear about it, sporadically and just worry about it, or whether when you get back and you're living in the city area and he's living in the city area, and you have then opportunity to, kind of see some things, firsthand. And it had been a few years, it'd been 3 or 4 years since I'd had that first episode, and then I had another one, and then it started being accompanied by panic attacks. And I just that's when I started going to Al-Anon. And it was through Al-Anon that I understood that I couldn't fix Chris's problems. That first of all, I didn't cause it. It wasn't our fault. I could not cure him. I became to understand that it was an illness and not a behavior flaw or a character flaw or a behavior choice. And I became aware of the fact that I couldn't fix it, And again, Dana mentioned the Serenity Prayer. I've told many people that Serenity Prayer is kind of cute, and it looks like something that someone would embroider on a plaque or something. But when it becomes your lifeline, it takes on a whole new difference, a whole different meaning. And I began. I did this online. I didn't go to a therapist, but I did take an online course in cognitive behavior therapy, which is it offers you some techniques that when you begin to get anxious, you have some strategies to cope with it. And then part of that too is to allow yourself to think about it in enough depth that you really begin to assimilate the fact that you cannot fix this. And so then you begin to accept, what you can. And that goes back to something that Virginia said that I think is well worth repeating, is sometimes, if you can find something in their behavior that you're willing to accept, the lowest level of what you're willing to accept, that can be really helpful. Now, of course, that, it's not healthy if that means that you just give up and you give them money and let them use. That's not what we're talking about. But it's like she said, there were times and I would text him and he wouldn't text me back, and I worried about that. But, then when he did text back, if I had gotten on to him, I just learned to let that go, because if I then made a big deal out of the fact that he took 3 days to text me back, well, then he's mad. And so I've blown my whole thing that I wanted to have, communication with him. So I think education is really important. There, and that, Parents Helping Parents is one of many groups that offers, information and resources, but we are, based here in Central Oklahoma, and our specific mission is to provide education and information and resources and support from shared experience for people who have a child of any age that's caught up in alcohol or substances. And so, it was really beneficial for me to get some education. And then I started, I had dabbled with mindfulness meditation, at various points in my life, but it was never really something that I really got into it. Always, I'd try it for a week or two and then it would fade away. But I had heard so many people say that it was really helpful for them that I did some searching around that, and I found Dan Harris, who is he's an anchor now, I think, on Good Morning America, but he used to do the evening news, and he had a full-blown panic attack while he was presenting the ABC nightly news, the 5:30 nightly news, and it was so distressing to him that he, sought help. And one of the recommendations was that he begin a practice of mindfulness meditation, and he did, and it helped him so much that he now has a side business called 10% Happier. It's all spelled out. And if you check that, there's an app, there's a website, and I found that and they have guided meditations on all kinds of different subjects and of various lengths. And I found that by having the availability of something like that online, and this was way before COVID. This was like 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. But I found that having a guided meditation online, that I was able to follow that then and practice it and do forth. And when I meditated the app, when I meditate, when you finish the meditation, it tells you, how many days you've done it in a row, and then it tells you how many cumulative hours you've done it. And I'm like, between 500 and 600 hours now, but I'll tell you, that all follows under the umbrella of self-care, Hugh. And I think that, if we're frantic, it's like I was saying before, I was boiling to death and I didn't even realize it, because I had just done that and done that and done that and done that until that seemed like normal life to me. And then I started having those health problems. But, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not getting enough sleep, if we're not taking care of ourselves nutritionally, if we're not getting some exercise, if we're not, socializing with anyone. Of course, I know now we have to socialize through Zoom, but if we're so anxious and we're so tense that we're not even allowing us to do things that we enjoy, like reading for me, or photography for me, or, if we just get so tied to what they're doing or what they're not doing and how desperately afraid we are of it, then as we focus on them, taking care of ourselves can be the last thing on our list, if we even have a list. And I well know that, I was working, we had other family members, we had other children, we had other grandchildren. I know how busy our lives are, but, if we don't, I read this just recently and I thought that is so true. It happened to be. If we don't practice self-care, then our body is going to fail, or our body or our mental capacity is going to fail in some regard, and we're not going to have any choice except to do something about it. And so like when we used to be able to get on airplanes, one of the first things that would happen they would say, they would be holding the apparatus, but the recorded voice would be saying, if air pressure fails in the airplane's cabin, these oxygen masks will drop. And one of the things that they tell us is put yours on first, because if you're about to asphyxiate, you're not going to be able to get it onto a struggling child. So it's the same way with us and our kids. If we're so anxious and so upset and so on edge that we lose it and we say things we don't mean to say, if we're like that anyway, then the holidays just pile onto that because everyone has unrealistic expectations of the holiday anyway. So we just risk collapsing before we can. We worry about but they're so needy and I've got to make sure that they're okay and everything. But without attention to our own needs, we can risk collapsing before we can even manage to help them. Even if we're still standing, we won't be able to think, we won't be able to plan, we won't be able to act, we won't be able to troubleshoot as effectively as we can when our health and our optimism is resilient. And, I came to learn that and through all these things, like I said, through Al-Anon, through some education that I did, through some therapy that I did, through some practices that I began to develop, I began to realize that if I couldn't fix him and if I couldn't control him, then it just made sense to me to come to the place where I just realized that I had to roll with the punches. I had to work on it to the point where I couldn't, when we got that phone call and he was, he'd been pulled over again, or he'd had a wreck again, when we got that call, I just got to, not that I ever liked it, but I developed enough resilience. And resilience, one definition of resilience is how you roll with life, how you adapt with flexibility and creativity over the long haul. And I'm not going to lie to you, it takes some work to get to that place. And first of all, even before you begin to feel that way, you have to set that as a goal, that I want to get to a place where I'm not so tied up in the knot about him that I can't have a life and I can't help anybody else. How can I get there? And it does take some work. Helping a child change relationships to substances is going to be if you're early in this, I don't want to be a discouragement to you, but with rare exceptions, it's a long-term prospect that is better for us to think about it as a marathon than just a sprint. If I can just grit it out, then I can get him into treatment and everything's going to be okay. That's usually not the way it works. So it's a project that's better approached as a marathon, like I said, and we must keep up our energy and our reserves to pace ourselves. So I would, in addition to having gratitude, in addition to not having unreasonable expectations, I would really encourage you to take care of yourself. And there's so much out there, even so much online, that if you set that as a goal, you can find something to help you.
Thanks, Bill. One of the images that I've heard in these groups before is it's really easy to put our child who's struggling with substances in the center of our circle, so that everything we do is about that.
Right.
And that's when we quit, we quit taking care of ourselves. We quit doing we quit paying attention to other family members, other people we love. Everything is around that. And it's because of our love of our children that they get in the center of that circle. But then, like you said, the boiling the frog, all of our attention gets drawn, and the goal in self-care is to get our loved one out on the circumference where everybody else we care about is. Whatever's in the center, or whatever our spiritual, our higher power is in the center, not somebody else. But in any case, thanks a lot, Bill. We only have a few more things that we specifically would like to mention. We want to talk a little bit about resources, but I wanted to ask if anybody had any comments or questions, or anything for our panelists, Bill or Virginia or Dana.
Sure. I have a question. I'm not a parent of a child, but I was a little sister. My big brother had substance abuse problems when I was in junior high, and now we have a good family friend who has relapsed, and I babysat him, so I've known him since he was 3. And his family is open with us about it. He's been open with me about it as well. He calls me his big sister, and so we're in communication. And I just found out that he has relapsed again, and so I just kind of a two-part question. Um, how would you have liked to have support from maybe not like immediate family, but people in your close circle, when your child was going through something like that? Like, how could I support his parents, or, even maybe talk to him about it again? And then um, they live back in Arkansas. So do y'all know off the top of your head, like any support groups or something that I can kind of guide his parents to, maybe to do some parent to parent
Yeah,
stuff?
those are really good questions. And yeah, Bill or Virginia or Dana, do you want to pick up? Don't, Bill, you're on mute.
I think anything that you could do would be helpful because I felt like isolated. I felt like nobody would understand, or, I couldn't talk to anyone until I started going to Al Anon and then Parents Helping Parents. There's so many people that just don't want to talk about it, or they don't know what to say or do. So I think anything that you can do, just to let them know that you're willing to talk to him, or listen, just go and sit with parents and listen to the parents. There's just anything you can do to give them some support would be helpful.
I definitely agree with that, Dana. And it's like when you have a child that people know they're just really at that point lost to substances. It's kind of like the same thing when someone loses a child. People don't know what to say, and so they feel like they're supposed to say something, but they don't know what to say, so then they just don't. And it's and I think also sometimes they're afraid to bring it up. They're it's almost like I know we don't go through this thought process, but logically, it's almost like we know if we don't bring it up, then they're not going to be thinking about it. Well, trust me, they are
Yeah.
thinking about it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would just, I would, really, I'll just say for us, and I've heard other people say this too, it's all too complex and there's too many moving parts to really do much talking about it at all to someone who isn't living it. I would say, people would say, well, how's Chris doing? And it was either say something like, well, we're just making it one day at a time, or, well, do you have like about 3 days where we could go hang out together? And you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I
Mm-hmm.
think if you just call them and said, hey, I've heard about Bob, and you know how much I love him, and you know how much I love you, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I think that's awesome. And in terms of support groups, our Parents Helping Parents, we have an online meeting now, just kind of a general online meeting, Zoom meeting, and then our Norman chapter and our Edmond chapter, both of their meetings are online now too, through Zoom. And then I've gone through the training, and Virginia has as well, gone through the training with the Partnership to End Addiction. It's the national organization, and it's drugfree.org. And if you go to drugfree.org, there's all kinds of downloadable, you can search under, if your child's smoking marijuana, you can search under marijuana, and then there's all this downloadable resources about that. In addition, you can there'll be a number, do you need support? and you call that number, and an intake person will have about a 30-minute conversation with you and get the nuts and bolts of what's going on in your situation. And then people like Virginia and I all across the country who have gone through the training and are peer parent coaches, your friends can be contacted with a peer parent coach like us, and they have, you know, about it goes for about 5 to 6 weeks. There's kind of a little curriculum that goes with it, but and then you'll also see on the partnership's website that on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights at, is it 7 o'clock our time, Virginia?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, 7 o'clock Oklahoma time. And on Saturdays at 10 o'clock Oklahoma time, there's group coaching sessions that are offered by the partnership. And, you know, they can either be identified and share in the group coaching session with other parents, or they can remain anonymous, but all that's free as well. So
Okay.
I'll shut up. Some other people may have some other resources.
The only other thing I'd add is Al-Anon. I imagine there's an Al-Anon group in there. Al-Anon is Anonymous or Celebrate Recovery. I think what both Dana and Bill said is that it's really common to feel alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Feel alone. You feel like everybody else's house on the outside looks perfect and my house is falling apart on the inside. Right. And so what's really important is to reach out there to other people who know what it feels like. So, you know, Partnership to End Addiction, Parents Helping Parents, Al-Anon, Families Anonymous. We'll put a lot of this stuff in our chat.
Perfect.
Let me take that opportunity now. If everybody, I think the conference is going to be saving the chat, but does everybody know how to save the chat themselves? If you want to, I didn't know this until a long time, but if you go to the 3 dots at the bottom, the 3 periods at the bottom, and you click on that, there'll be a place to click on Save Chat, and it'll save the chat to your computer, probably under your Zoom folder. So, but that's a way to save all this information. But I think also the conference is going to have the chats available too. So, anybody else have any comments or questions? Want to make sure there aren't any on chat. Well, one of the things, we did this a little bit. If questions come up, we still have a few more minutes, but we did this a little bit with what Bill said, but
Hugh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt. We had a question in chat, but they direct messaged it to me.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
So I figured I would throw it out there.
Yeah.
It is, do parents often see signs of trauma or mental health before identifying a young person's involvement in substance use?
Yeah, we certainly did.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I did not either.
Well, and can I just say, you know, when after our divorce, we lived close enough that we could just share the boys back and forth. But then, about 3 or 4 years into it, I moved far enough away that then the boys would have to choose which parent they were going to live with because of the schools. And so he was not living with us. And so that was part of it. But we began, you know, his mom and I noticed from the very time that he was little, he was very introverted. And if we got into a company of other people, he was either in her arms or my arms. And we knew that. But then after, you know, I now know that he was starting to use drugs. You know, he just seemed troubled. He seemed moody. He seemed his behavior was erratic. Well, he was 13, 14-year-old boy. I don't know any 13 or 14-year-old boy that, they're not going to be like that. Uh, and so I would just encourage you, um, don't rule. If you've got a kid that's troubled, if you've got a kid that their grades are going way down unexplainably, if you've got a kid that maybe participated in sports, but they're just not interested in that anymore, if they're just kind of going into the room and shutting the door, it may be because they're depressed, but don't rule out the fact that they may be self-medicating their depression with drugs. So I don't know where the question was really where they were going, but that's something that I've recognized later about Chris is that, I was just, it was too easy to believe that he was just being a teenage brat, you know?
Just speaking as a parent, there are a lot of causes of substance use disorder. Sometimes it's genetic, sometimes it's mental health, sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes that for whatever reason, they just react differently to the drug, right? I can drink a beer and I can stop after a beer. Other people can't, right? And that's not because they have less willpower. They just react to a beer differently than I do, right? So there are a lot of causes to substance use disorder, and it's really helpful for therapists to try to figure out what the cause of your son's substance use disorder is so that they can treat it. But it's almost always not, as a parent, it probably doesn't help me to go there. Because I'm right. I need to get my son, if he's got substance use disorder, to somebody who can help them and they can figure out what's bringing this out. But for me, the less I concentrate on that and just concentrate on getting my son help and getting myself help, it's probably going to work out better for all of us. But it's natural. It's absolutely natural. I spent a whole lot of time wondering why my son was using drugs. And that was, as it turned out for me anyway, that was a waste of my time. But that was a great question though, absolutely. Because I mean, there is, I'm sure you've heard about co-occurring. I mean, lots of people who struggling with drugs also have mental health disorders and trying to figure out how those are working together. And it's a great question. Lots of people use drugs as a result of trauma too. So lots of reasons. Virginia, Bill said a little bit about the partnership to end addiction already. Do you want to say a little bit about Parents Helping Parents? And then I'll ask Dana to say about some books that she found were particularly helpful in closing.
Sure. I think in the chat, our website and phone number and email address is on there. But I just wanted to tell a little bit more about what all that we do. I think somebody mentioned earlier that we have online meetings. I think Bill mentioned that right now we have online meetings, both the Norman and the Edmond chapter. Between those two chapters, we have, I think, 4 online meetings per month, plus our virtual chapter has online meetings. And between all those meetings, we generally have speakers that provide education and also resources and also support. So, our mission is to provide education, resources, and support to parents of children who struggle with substance use. And so, that's what our meetings do is they provide all of that. And when I first came to Parents Helping Parents, I didn't know anything about addiction. And that is what Parents Helping Parents provided me. They provided me with the education, number one. I learned so much from the speakers that spoke and presented at the meetings, to the books. All of the chapters have their own libraries, and I just read and read and read. And even though the meetings are online now, I believe there's ways to access the books in the libraries. So just contact that number that is in the chat, and we can hook you up with the chapters and get you some books if you'd like to read them. So Parents Helping Parents can educate you, and they can provide resources. We have our website that is in the chat is incredible information and resources on the website. Has resources for all sorts of things, including support groups, all sorts of support groups, like there's Al-Anon, NAMI, Families Anonymous, Celebrate Recovery, just all sorts of support groups, resources for providers, outpatient counseling treatment centers, providers for your children who, are addicted, providers. I'm not sure about for you. I sought my own treatment and had a counselor for myself. There's resources for treatment centers. There's a huge resource for books to read. Danny's going to talk about books, but you can go on there and there's just a huge listing of all sorts of books. So just, incredible resources there. And then, support. It was just incredible for me to walk into the room of Parents Helping Parents and be with other parents who had experienced the same thing I was experiencing, because before that time, I felt so alone and isolated and thought I was the only one in the world who was going through this. And once I walked in those rooms, I immediately felt better. And to have the hugs and support from other parents was just incredible. And so that's what we do. And it's a little bit more difficult online, but we're still doing it. We still have phone calls. We can still talk on the phone, and the online support is still there. Hopefully someday we'll be back in person, but we can still do everything online. So it's just an incredible organization, and I don't know where I would be without it today. So did I miss anything, Hugh?
No, it was great.
Okay.
Dana.
Thank you.
I do have a question on chat.
Sure.
And it asks, do you ever get to where you don't worry if they are out late or don't know where they are, even if they've been doing well? And I would say, yes, you can get to a point to where you don't worry. I still have my days, but it's much better than what it used to be. So I think if you do work on yourself, you can overcome that.
Yeah, you get, I mean, as Dana's saying, you can learn some tools to shut up that SH committee before it gets going too much. You can't, I've never been able to completely shut it off. I mean, but what I have learned to do is what to do when it starts up, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't take off, right? And get out of hand.
Yeah, that's right, Hugh. It takes effort. Like I said before, you have to really work at it. And I don't, I was kind of thinking of the analogy, instead of, if you're in a car, you're aware that they're in the back seat, but it's not like, them, fighting with each other and screaming and, pushing the back of your chair, but you're aware that it's there, but it is possible to learn how to kind of better drive down the road.
I know we're 3 minutes late. I want to give Dana a chance to mention some of the books that I don't know what laws we're breaking by going late here. So if I'm going to get arrested, go for it. But Dana, what 3 or 4 books do you recommend that helped you?
I just have a couple of them that I really like, that really helped me. And one of them, of course, is Beyond Addiction. And you do hear about that one quite often. But another one that I don't hear a lot about that I thought was an excellent book was The 4 Seasons of Recovery for Parents of Alcoholics and Addicts. And it really helped me. It really taught me a lot. One of the things in it was talking about, and that's what I did, is when I would look at my son, I would still see him at like 8, 9, 10 years old, and he was 26. so I've learned now that, you know, he is a grown man. I have to look at him as a man and not as my child. And that really, it helped me out a lot to do that and not see him as that little child any longer. So I thought that was one book.
Yeah, thanks. Really helpful. And there, you know, if you go to our website, there's a list of books that only my wife in Virginia have read, all of them. But
Dana too, I'm sure.
I am supposed to let you know that there will be a survey that'll be sent out at the end of the conference. And if you respond, win a Subaru. Oh no, what is it that you win if you respond? If you respond and add your email, you'll have a chance to win a door prize. Yes, a Subaru, I believe it is. So it's not, obviously, if anybody, don't sue me. So I really appreciate everybody being here tonight. Our panelists, Bill and Dana and Virginia, you were great. Thanks for sharing your stories and helping us all feel a little bit more connected. Derek, thanks for you running the show running stuff behind the show. Becky and Joni and Jerry and everybody who's put on this thing, and all of you who've come here tonight to listen. If we can do anything, if you go to our websites, you'll see that each of our chapter has a phone. Call that number. You know, sometimes just because you want to talk, and you can talk, and we can listen. So if we can do anything, you just let us know how we can help. And thanks for coming tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, panelists. Thank you, hosts. Everybody have a wonderful holiday. Becky, was there any other announcements? Did we miss anything?
I think we're good.
You got it. You've got it.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank y'all.
You.
Hi, guys.